And I met a professor of Bozeman, a teacher of the university in Bozeman, and he asked me a question. He said every time he was going to a ranch, he would ask to the people, to the owner, what they want to do. And he said, Charlotte, what do you want to do with your ranch? And I say, a sponge. And I think that just that word sponge is now in my head forever. And and he said, that's the best answer I've ever received from someone taking care of land. So I would like to copy the beaver, and we are trying now to implement that. And my questions on this ranch, but everywhere, and we work with lawyers, and those lawyers are in Arizona and also in Bozeman in Montana, and geologists who's working also with us and with other people on those projects of artificial beaver dam and trying to copy and to mimic the beaver, which is a challenge because the beaver are working day and night and they're really expert. The lawyers we work with are trying to make that, I would say, that path easier, the legal path to have permit, because as you know, there are water rights, and that's the problem in a lot of countries. I think the water right, you cannot use the water as you want, you cannot keep the water as you want. And they are trying to make a route, and we have been working for a year so that they can prepare for small farmers and for people who are not wanting to make that difficult legal process to have the possibility to start those dams and slow down water in the creeks and draws and or try to keep the water, so you know, all that system. So my different question were of course the implementation. It's always nice to have good ideas, but then the implementation is the difficult thing, and it's a very urgent, huge work. And I think it would be really good if the government was funding and helping small farmers, and we are trying to organize that, to have funds or matching funds. Like if we find some funds, then the government match the amount we put, and that could be a system. So my different question were that implementation at a legal level, but also at a government level, how to make the government understand in every country in the world that it's their problem too. And it's very nice that private people or little organization or foundation try to do something, but how to connect that with the government, seeing the long-term importance of having not a desert. The other question is how to create an easy presentation for little farmers, so that people who have no knowledge or no energy, no finance, no nothing, how to make them enthusiastic about just putting every day 5 stones in a drawer. It's already something. Slow down the water. The water doesn't want to be stopped, it wants to be slowed down. And otherwise she gets really upset. And we have been building some dams, and quite quickly, and a little bit before winter, very fast, and they explode with the first flood. And so the water is it's a very special thing. So how to protect also was another question, how to protect the riparian wetlands. And you know, we are restoring wetlands, restoring creeks. You need to have the riparians also protected, and how to protect them. And on this ranch we have a lot of forest and a lot of growing pines and juniper, and they are invading quite a lot, encroaching the valley. And my idea was to put wooden fence, so clear up the forest at the same time and take care of the forest, so to have fire break, take the young trees out and put them as a wooden fence, like just put trees around the riparian, because if you make those big work of artificial beaver dam or everything, the wildlife and the cattle are also there, and they don't help you to let those ecosystems to grow peacefully around the creek. And that's a very important thing, and how to implement that again. And so that's about all my question for the moment. And I really look forward to hear all of you. And I feel so enthusiastic to know that a lot of people are doing fantastic things. Like I remember in South Africa, the work for planting this Speckbaum was the tree, and the swales in Spain and all those systems. So I pass to you now, and I'm really, really curious about hearing all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I think that's a great kickoff of getting us into the headspace of eco-hydrology. Thanks for that. So Valet, I'm sorry, I called you Anna before, but your name is actually Valet, I'm sorry. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. Early morning as well for you.
Wait a minute. Yes, it is.
We can hear you loud and clear. Yeah,
yeah.
all good.
Yes.
So Valet, first I'll introduce the work of Maloon Institute from Australia, and then I'll give the floor to you, and Jeremiah can share the slides after that as well.
Good, thank you.
The Maloon Institute, they have been in touch with our partner in Australia, Wide Open Agriculture, in giving a training on this specific topic. So the Maloon Institute is a really renowned institute experienced in rehabilitating watersheds on a large scale, as well as regeneration of landscapes across Australia. So I looked at their website a little bit, and in their description of a holistic approach to landscape restoration, they said, "We are about inspiring people to make a difference, believing that every regenerated inch of land contributes to the overall health of the soil we so vitally need, and in turn, the well-being of us all." I thought that was really inspiring to read on their platform. And a fun fact about the Maloon Institute is that their organization is named after the Maloon Creek, which is where they've been working with over 20 landholders along a 50-kilometer stretched creek, trying to restore 23,000 hectares altogether in terms of the functioning of the creek and the ponds in the middle. And it's a really inspiring organization. And I'll share a short video of their work. And I'll send some more videos that they've shared with us as a resource in the recap of this session. Here we go. One minute. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Can you hear it as well?
Yeah, a little bit louder, please.
There were many wetlands, swampy meadows, and chains of ponds. Vegetation flourished along the waterways, which captured sediments and gradually built up the soils in the valley floors. Moisture was stored beneath the floodplain, where plants could easily reach the water table. During dry times, the water flow remained beneath the surface. In wet times, the flow spread out across the floodplain, and valuable nutrients were captured and recycled by the dense vegetation. These rich, fertile floodplains were widespread. When European settlers arrived, they found the dense native grasslands and abundant water supply ideal for sheep and cattle production. The new farming practices had major impacts on the fragile Australian environment and dramatically changed how water moved through the landscape. Trees were cleared and grasslands were grazed to the ground, removing the very vegetation that had slowed the water flow and built the fertile floodplains in the first place. The water picked up speed and the landscape began to erode. Incisions cut deeply into the fertile soils, taking the nutrients and sediments with it. The newly formed erosion channels acted as drains, dropping the water table to the channel floor and drying out the wetlands. The continuous channels concentrated the water flow and made it faster. Very little vegetation remained to slow down the floods, and more nutrients were lost downstream rather than being deposited on the floodplain. Similar processes have occurred across Australia, with incised streams flowing faster and with more energy, continuing to strip away valuable soil, organic matter, and nutrients as they go. At the Maloon Institute, we strive to restore the original landscape function that produced the fertile valley floors discovered by the early settlers. A pilot project undertaken in 2005 by Tony Coote and his wife Tony, along with innovative landscape thinker Peter Andrews, has been a great success. Leaky weirs were installed along a 3-kilometre stretch of Maloon Creek and vegetation planted to slow the flow and reinvigorate the floodplain. Now it's a healthy, vibrant ecosystem, which has increased the productivity on the floodplain by over 60%. The pilot project has now been expanded into the Maloon Community Landscape Rehydration Project across the entire Maloon Creek watershed. The Maloon Institute is working with 20 landholders along 50 kilometres of creek and over 23,000 hectares. The new project has been recognised by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network to help in the development of guidelines for sustainable, profitable and productive farming. The Maloon Institute aims to help other communities rehydrate 100 landscapes across Australia by inspiring them and equipping them with the skills to rehydrate their own catchments. Our vision is to see thriving, resilient landscapes, rich in soils and biodiversity, providing water and food security for all Australians.
Right, so that was an introduction of the work of the Maloon Institute. It's truly inspiring. There's a lot of videos that I'll share with you. So, and I'm assuming that some of us have a little bit more time now at home to also, yeah, just dive into some of this content. So I'll share it with you and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So now, Vale and Jeremiah, are you ready?
Let's give it a shot. I'm going to share my screen and it'll connect and make it through. Stand by.
Perfect. Yeah.
And Valeria, you can come off of mute. That way you can talk when you're ready. Share my screen. Let me know if it's coming up.
So while we're starting up, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about Anna Valley-Clark, as well as Jeremiah. Jeremiah Lebowitz, he's the executive director of Cuenca Los Ojos, if I'm not mistaken. And Anna Valley-Clark is the founder of Cuenca Los Ojos. Vale is a restoration professional who has dedicated herself to preserving and restoring the biodiversity of the borderland region between the United States and Mexico. And in Mexico, she established the foundation Cuenca Los Ojos, a watershed of the springs, freely translated, and its sister organization in the US to support a network to manage, research, and restore more than 150,000 acres in the Rio Jaqui watershed of Southeast Arizona and Northeast Sonora. So an interesting fact about Vale is that she's actually been restoring watersheds for the last 3 decades, so has a lot of experience, and I'm really excited to have you both. And I think the presentation is all good, so I think we're ready to go. You have, the floor is all yours. Anna, you have about 15 to 20 minutes.
Did it let up? Can everybody see the?
I think we can see the presentation. Yeah.
Okay. Valeria,
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Good. I'm delighted to be with you and have this opportunity. Actually, it's been 40 years that I've been
oh, wow. Sorry.
Water here. But I'm going to tell you about the first 20 years in Arizona in a mountainous region. And then I thought I'd like to talk to you about the next 20 years, which are in a valley in Mexico. So you get an idea of how you can restore in both of these areas. When I came to Arizona 40 years ago, I saw a mountain range that had been quite destroyed by past history. they discovered copper in the region, and they needed trees to supply the copper mine with fuel. So they had 16 sawmills in this region of the Chiricahua Mountains. And when they cut down the trees, then of course the grasses came up because they were exposed to the light, and they put sheep and cattle on these hills. And these hills really weren't used to having large bovines because they had well, the valleys, antelopes, and deer up in the hills, so that it was more than the grasses really were used to. And by the time I got here in 1980s, there was very little grass on the hills and many bare spots, particularly on the south side of the hills. So the first picture will show you what we did. It's very simple. We'll start very small and then proceed into more structures later. Jeremiah, can you show the first picture?
I think we might have lost the presentation. I'll just download it just in case. Is that
Okay.
correct?
They're just 6 pictures.
Okay, perfect. I'll just pull them up.
Well, I'll just talk while you're doing that. So what we did
Okay,
was...
I'm here, guys. Let me see if sorry, Valeria. Let me, okay, I'm trying. Is my screen still not sharing? Oh, you started, there it is.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay.
So we started high up on the hills. What I realized was a lot
Yeah,
of...
you can go to the first
picture. Yeah, a lot of the erosion was happening on the south slopes where there was water just sheeting off the mountainside and coming into the washes at the bottom with such a force that huge boulders were being moved. And each time the rains came, the canyon bottoms were being destroyed because the vegetation was being wiped out, and the channels were digging deeper and deeper. And meanwhile, on the sides of the hills, the little amount of dirt was being washed down the mountainside. So 3 mountain sides were all washing into a single canyon at once. So we started up on the top of the hills. You can't really see how steep it is in this picture, but you see a very small row of rocks, not high, just small row and you see a lot of bare rock in the foreground. That's sort of where we started. And it was amazing how much change happened just with that small action. We did them on all the hills. We have over 20,000 of these. And the grasses started coming back, and the main washes in the canyon received less water all at once. And it gave us a chance to start working in the canyons themselves. So the next picture shows us a picture of the north side of the mountain, which is more vegetated. And this is a wash there. This is the type of washes we found all over. This one's about 5 feet high. I'm 5 feet, so it's about 5 feet high. Some of them were 10 feet high. And we took all these rocks and we started placing them in a manner that would plug up these little gullies. So we take the big rocks and we put them on the bottom, and we try to key it into a tree or a rock on either side of the wash. But we'd start at the top and we'd work all our way down the mountain. And we put the big rocks on the bottom, as I said, and then we put smaller rocks on top. And those smaller rocks we'd fit in like a puzzle, and we fit them facing down so that the surface of the rock faces down, so that when the water comes down the mountain, it doesn't flip the rock over, but it wedges the rock with the force of the water more into the mountain. In a very short time, the amount of erosion collected behind all these rocks, and you had a series of steps. The bottom of the top step before should reach the top of the step below it. So in other words, it goes down in steps. The next picture. So when the rains came, then you see this is what you'd start to see in these tributaries to the main wash. And you'd start to see vegetation coming in. Right now, the water's covered some of the vegetation, but there's vegetation throughout all of this area. And we had some scientists from USGS, Laura Norman, come in, and she put some mechanisms to measure the amount of water that was held in the ground. And she measured that at least 27% of the water stayed in the ground all the time. And that's because behind each one of these steps, that sediment is like a sponge. The last person, Charlotte, talked about sponges. All the hills were becoming sponges at this point, and these steps were sponges. And so the water doesn't evaporate out, but the water stays in the ground and flows underground. So you have wet all year round. And then we had more vegetation. We had pools of water. When we had pools of water, we had insects. When we had insects, we had bats. When we had birds. The wildlife just exploded. And we began to see huge changes in vegetation and wildlife. Let's see what the next picture is. All right, this is a picture of erosion in Mexico. I will just tell you that in the United States, after the 20 years work, we went from dry, south-facing mountains with a lot of bare rock exposed with very little grass to very grassy slopes that actually became sponges and held water. And we had water flowing during the rainy season before, only 4 months. And then we went to 8 months. And for the last 4 years, we've had water flowing in the main washes all year round. So that shows you the impact of these trincheras or little rock dams in the hills. Now, now we get to Mexico. Mexico is on the border of Arizona and New Mexico where we're working. It's in the San Bernardino Valley, and this is the type of erosion we came across, from anything from 15 to 30 feet deep washes. And the first thing we did, because it was very fine, silty soil, we could use a bulldozer here, and we bulldozed all those big, deep gullies and put little pockets of earth, one after the other, so that if you were to fly over this region after the rainy season, it would look like a string of pearls. You'd have all these water catching the sun, and one after the other. We put 300 of them in one little valley, and then a river nearby started, or a little wash started running and having water all year round, because those little gully plugs, we call them, were putting water into the ground. Anything to stop the water from leaving the land, anything to get the water into the ground, slow it down. So in this case here, this was part of an old cienega, an old wetlands that stretched for many miles. And what happened, the same history happened here as happened up in the Chiricahuas. That was overgrazing to the north in Arizona and New Mexico, had depleted the grasses in the 1880s, 1910. All of these wetlands that we had in Mexico started drying up because the water, when it hit the ground, hit cement, and it couldn't go into the ground, and it started finding a low place, and it found a low place on either side of the wetlands and down cut 30 feet on either side. And so the wetlands started to dry up. There was only 4% of the wetland left when we came there in the late 1990s and started working. As I said, the first thing we did was with bulldozers. Then we started to work in the major washes. And as you can see, there are no rocks in this soil here. So, but there were many rocks on on the base of the wash. So we use those rocks to put in gabions. Now the difference between the loose rock structures and what we're doing now is a gabion is not loose rock. It is rock contained in wire baskets. Do we have a picture of one of those, Jeremiah?
Yep. Yeah, we do. Next slide.
Next slide. Okay, this gives you an idea of the scale of what we had to do, since we were not starting at the top of the system and we were in the middle of the system. We had to do very, very large structures. And since the soil was like talcum powder, it was so fine, we were told that we could never do it. We were told that this would be impossible. But I just wanted to see if we could take the worst possible scenario and turn it around. If we can do it, you can do it anywhere. So you see on the left-hand side, you see me standing down at the bottom, gives you an idea of scale. And you see the depth of the down cutting. So this is the scale we had to use. And because the water force was so strong, we had to put, and it was so large, we had to put these rocks in baskets. You can see on the right how it fills up behind the gabion, and you can see little grasses coming in. We can do the next slide. Okay, this is the first one we put in, and it is probably about 10 feet high, because that would be 4, 4, and 2, 10 feet high. We try to key it into the banks about 6 to 10 feet, and we try to key it into the bottom of the wash because we need an anchor. The next slide. This is that same area 5 years later. And you can see that it's filled in totally behind, and it's filled in front because there's another gabion downstream of this. And so it's filled in front and behind, and you can see all the vegetation coming back. It is amazing how much earth moves. I had no idea till I started doing this how much earth moves. And in a short period of time, you begin to see results. We can see the next slide. This is downstream. So what started happening was that all these steps of gabions, the soil behind it, if you have a gabion that's 500 feet wide and 10 feet high, and then you have that soil going back for another 100 yards, that whole triangle of silt becomes a sponge. So we had a series of huge sponges in this wash. And what happened was the water stays in the wash, traveling underground, and it comes up down below, and then you have permanent water. So the river started coming back upstream. And where we had water permanently, we started putting in pole plantings. You can see in this picture the poles. We cut the branches off willows and cottonwoods, and we stuck them about 6 to 8 feet in the ground. And a question was asked about cattle. We did keep the cattle out until these trees had a chance to get up a little bit. The next picture. This is less than 4 years later, I think. Yeah, 4 years later. And that same tree is the tree that was in the distance that you saw on the bank. And this is how it's all filling in. And what happens now as the water comes through, these trees bend over and the grasses stabilize the soil, and you have a buildup of soil. Each year we get a couple of feet of soil building up so that the washes are gradually building up downstream as well as upstream. Next slide. Okay, that's it. So we have gone from a dry wash that people used to be able to drive up the washes on the rocks into the States. And, you know, it's gone from that to a jungle. Basically, we now have a jungle there, and we have more wildlife than we've ever had before. And we are now putting cattle back on the land and managing them very, very specifically for a test case to see how you best can manage land on with cattle on say 8 inches of rain. So we put them on all together, and then we move them off every 4 hours. It's not as difficult as it seems because it's flat land, and we can put string wire that's electrified, and we can roll it up and put another string down 100 yards beyond that, so that it takes 20 minutes to do, and the cattle know how to do it and they move. So we're very carefully monitoring everything we are doing so that we can pass it on to other ranchers. The area is a ranching area, and the ranchers in Mexico are very progressive. They're very interested in learning we're learning from each other. We have a WhatsApp of 46 ranchers all talking about how they're doing things. So it is becoming a community project. What we're doing is passing on to others, and they pass on to us. In the States, the amount of work that we did with gabions has been translated into a community project in the Borderlands Restoration Network is the name of it. And the whole community is putting in gabions and is restoring watersheds in their community. And that is helping with flooding. It's also recharging the aquifer with all the water going into the ground. That's really, I think my time is up, is it not?
Well, I think we can have a bit of space for some questions and then proceed. I remember, if I remember correctly, Charlotte, some questions were around, how do you determine which techniques or approaches are fit where? If you could share some of your experiences there. And another question is indeed, if we're talking about a sizable property, what does that mean for team resources, for funding resources, for just the whole of getting it done, the how?
Right.
Those were some
Well,
questions.
I'll start with the what to do where. When you have a south-facing slope, that's where I'd work first, in the sunny side, because there was scant vegetation there, and we needed to slow the water down there. In the forested area where there were deep gullies, we needed to use a higher rock gabions, 5 feet tall. You try to put a gabion in a wash that fits the lowest bank. Say you have one bank that's 10 feet high and another bank 5 feet high. You generally put the gabion to the height of the lowest bank, so that the water can go flood out over the bank to deposit soil in a wider area, recharging the soil, bringing in nutrients. So that's what you do there. In the mountainous areas, you can use loose rock structures. Down in the valley, where it was very flat and silty soil in the middle of the system, you need to have very large rocks, and they generally have to be in wire baskets, or you can use the bulldozer, as I said, to put the gully plugs in. They're just earthen berms. And generally there, we did reseed, because when you're moving soil, you are really changing the topsoil. So sometimes that insists on having seeds put into the soil again to jumpstart the process. So we did seed in that instance. Okay, so that's what you do where in different places. about you want to know about resources? We had government grants to do some of the work, but 90% of the work was done with private funds. And now we are a public 501c3, and we are asking foundations to give an endowment, and this endowment will be used for teaching. We've done a lot. We've had over 200 institutions of learning come and teach. We have been teaching with the Hopi and Navajo tribes. We had, believe it or not, a workshop with both of them. They don't always get along, but they all came down and they built gabions, and then we went back up to the tribal lands, and on the Navajo lands built gabions there. And so it's spreading, the word is spreading, but we do need government funds. We do need the governments to be aware of how important this is and to help landowners do that. So we're trying to help private landowners with the WhatsApp and sharing our techniques with them in the States and in Mexico. But we do need the governments to focus on how important it is to give money to private landowners. And we would be happy, Cuenca Los Ojos, to host workshops with funding to help other people do it on a large scale. Now, you said how big the land is. We're working with over 150,000 acres in Mexico. So and we go from high woodlands down to deep canyons to flatlands, such as I showed you. I didn't show you all the different variations of land there, but we're doing different techniques on each of the lands.
Beautiful. I know that we'll probably have a million more questions, and if I keep time properly, we'll probably have some time for that as well. And Valet, thank you so much, Jeremiah, as well. It's really inspiring, and I think I can speak for most of us that it's also something we need, sparking hope in strange times. So that's really, really nice. Thanks a lot. And if possible, Valet, we would also, Valerie would like to share some more resources or links. It's probably all on your website, and I'll make sure to check with you. Sure.
Yes.
So thanks again. And now I'd like to give the floor to Otto, our friend from South Africa. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, fantastic. Let me share screen.
Okay, and while you share screen, I'll first explain a bit about Otto, because some of you don't know him yet. Let me see, I looked up some nice, I prepared a little bit. Let's see, so Otto, he's the landscape innovator at Living Lands, an organization based in South Africa, working from South Africa on holistic landscape restoration. And what else did yeah, so there's a fun fact about Otto. So if there's anything you want to know about lions, he's your go-to man. That's something not everybody knows, but he knows a lot about lions. So that's for future reference. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's interesting how you put a presentation together with certain ideas in your mind and bearing these questions in mind that Charlotte gave, and you kind of come up with a story. But so many things have been covered already. And I think collectively, the presenters are going to tell a nice story of the variety of things, the variety of applications in the restoration field towards water capture and ecosystem services reinstatement. So just a quick bit of background about myself. I'm a nature conservationist. I've been in the field for the last 15 years. I've been practicing restoration ecology for the last 3.5 years only, so not nearly the 40 years of Valet, and hope to reach that point one day. It's quite admirable to stay in an industry as challenging as this one for such a long time. But that being said, I've been in the Baviaanskloof now for the last 3.5 years, implementing restoration projects with various partners. It's a mountain catchment area in the Eastern Cape on the southern coast of South Africa. Extremely arid. We receive about 280 millimeters of rainfall a year, but that has 73% standard deviation around the mean over the last 100 years. So in some years we have immense rainfalls of up to 800 millimeters, where we have huge flash floods and huge amounts of destruction. And then as has been the case for the last 5 years, we've received less than half of our average rainfall annually. So we're looking at about 100, 120 millimeters a year over the last 5 years. And this has been making the restoration practice very, very interesting and quite painstaking. I think a lot of the joy that I gain out of this industry is being able to see the results, because you implement things, you put things in place, you put in inputs, and you want to see outcomes. And that's been slow in coming in the Baviaanskloof. But it seems things are changing. We are having some decent rainfall this year. We have had so far this year. We're sitting at about half of our annual average at the moment, and that's only 2 months into the year, or 3 months in. So let's hope for the best. So considering the topics, I don't go too much into every little type of technique that we use. I think there are brilliant and excellent resources out there that can be very easily accessed, technical documentation around different practices, everything from gabions to rock buns, silt traps, and swales. But I thought more along the line of what are the things that you need to take into consideration when trying to decide what you want to implement. So I came up with a very quick little schematic, just taking into account the things that I generally think about and refer to when trying to make decisions on the landscape, and trying to decide what activities we're going to do. I mean, these represented here are really just the biophysical elements. Of course, there's human resource elements, knowledge elements, capacity, all the rest of it. I'm glad, Charlotte, that you mentioned the wildlife factor, and Belay as well. It's very, very important in ecosystem restoration, and I think restoration practitioners generally tinker with the things that they find tangible, predominantly soils and vegetation, but particularly in the landscapes in South Africa, wildlife management and livestock management in general across these landscapes is very important. So I haven't included that in this diagram, but yeah, that being said, so if you look at the various topics, I kind of just how can I say, prioritize them or structure them so that the ones that are black are kind of items that you very much struggle to influence, whereas the red texts are things that we generally tend to influence, but are either difficult or expensive or resource heavy. And the green items are the things that we generally focus on, that we have, it appears, a fair amount of experience in, are not extremely costly, and are kind of the go-tos for interventions in the landscape. So yeah, I think what we play around with primarily is soil and vegetation, and with consideration to the climate factor. And yeah, hope that gives some sort of idea. Hope it's not too complicated. Okay, and then going on from that, on the ground, things that we look at in terms of decision making, and I hope to in the next few slides bring this into perspective, just taking one of the techniques into account or into consideration, expanding a bit on that, is living in a mountain catchment area. Slope, of course, is a huge element. You know, doing rock buns, pondings, that sort of stuff on very steep slopes have a very high risk in terms of both access and then volatilizing soils and things like that. So depending on what slope you're working on would very much influence the techniques that you use. Aspect has been mentioned. Soils in our environment is a key factor. We've got very dispersive soils, very silty soils, but underlain by sandstones, which are very rocky and sandy. and have very little nutrient capacity as well as water retention capacity. However, the infiltration rates are quite high. So taking these things into account, you can start thinking around what interventions or what structural interventions you can put in place that, let's say, for instance, on the upper rocky slopes where you have high water infiltration but low retention capacity and high volumetric or saturation rates, you can build big structures that can infiltrate the soil relatively quickly, and that can then enter the landscape in that manner. Whereas in the lowlands, where there's a high proportion of silt, for instance, the soils become very capped, particularly the top 5 to 10 centimeters becomes concrete or similar to concrete, and your infiltration rates are next to zero. However, your retention capacity is quite high because it's very high in clay so yeah, these are some of the considerations. Then, of course, vegetation cover and structure. I mean, when you're looking at a healthy ecosystem, one of the things that keep it cycling healthily is the intact vegetation structure and diversity. And that, of course, influences throughfall, how much of that water actually hits the ground. I mean, water falling at 32 kilometers an hour has a huge impact on soil aggregate stability, impaction, oxygen. So yeah, considering your vegetation structure, what you're actually working with and starting with will have a high impact on your decision making. Like I said earlier, in the Baviaanskloof, rainfall is extremely variable. We can have extremely intense rainfall events, 50 millimeters in an hour, or we can have very light rainfall that hardly cause any penetration, that end up evaporating or disappearing out of the system before it actually has any impact on the environment. We live in a very arid region, so our evapotranspiration rates are, I think, about 4 to 8 times, depending on our seasonal rainfall, greater than our precipitation. So really capturing water in the environment is crucial. It's the one element in the Baviaanskloof that we just don't have. We've got a relative abundance of medium, even though we've lost the majority of our topsoil on the upper slopes. The medium remains there. We've got a lot of energy produced by the sun. And so the one thing our nutrients are relatively stable and well distributed. But the one thing we don't have is moisture. And then, of course, our disturbance regimes. We live in a landscape that is extremely heterogeneous in its topography, biogeography, and also biodiversity. So yeah, we've got very fire-prone fynbos systems that tend to burn on a large scale. 2 years ago, we lost about 250,000 hectares of fynbos to fire. Very natural part of the system, but considering that the lower slopes that are a thicket habitat have been degraded through overutilization or unsustainable management over the last 200 years, there was no buffer between the upper slope mountains where the fynbos burnt and your lower slope alluvial bottoms, your valley bottoms. And that caused huge runoff events, flooding events, and incisions into the landscape that is very much bare. And then, of course, herbivory in South Africa as well as in America, herbivory is a very big part of the system. It has evolved with herbivores in the system. So just plain removal of herbivores that play a very critical function is not necessarily your go-to. So things like deer, antelope that might eat encroaching species that you don't necessarily want there are a benefit to the system. So yeah, but let's go into some of the techniques, or the one that I'm going to be discussing more in depth is what we call ponding here in South Africa. Other places they call them micro catchments or depressions, basins. But the primary goal of this technique is essentially water harvesting, slowing down surface runoff, and trying to create a preferable environment for plant growth. Yeah, so in this event, on this landscape, this is part of an alluvial fan that sits at the bottom of a very steep slope. So on the slope itself, various techniques have been put in place various interventions have been put in place to slow down water runoff. But whatever water ends up running off of those slopes, we wanted to try and catch as much of that as possible to stop incision into the landscape, capture as much water into the soil, and get vegetation cover onto that landscape as quickly as possible to start natural cycles. So across the Baviaanskloof, we've done, I think, sitting at about 110,000 of these ponds across around 600 or 700 hectares. So we've really used this technique extensively, and particularly because it's relatively easy to do. It's relative low cost compared to a lot of other techniques, and it's suitable to the environment, to both the soils, the climate, and what we're trying to achieve here at the end of the day. So just to give you a few of the things that we've learned from using this technique is, so over a 2-year period, we found that just creating these ponds, and these are ponds that weren't infilled, so there was no siltation running into them. They were protected from general siltation. We had a 51% increase in the rooting zone over a 2-year period. So in practical terms, that went from a less than 0 centimeter rooting zone, where a pentrometer really wouldn't even penetrate the soil, all the way down to 5 to 12 centimeters of rooting zone. So this includes infiltration area for water to actually infiltrate, and that is so critical for plant recruitment. And that increased another 24% where we brush packed, and I'll get into some of the brush packing stuff a little after this slide. Then we had a 64% increase in canopy cover and fractional green canopy cover. And then an additional 93% increase on these ponds where we brush packed versus not brush packing. So then we had a 57% greater gravimetric soil moisture content in these ponds a 2-week period after a saturation rainfall event. There was 57% more moisture in these ponds versus controls, which were diagonally 1 meter away from these ponds. So that would be basically your bare capped soil. And then, yeah, so the other thing that we did to increase the recruitment of plants, try and get vegetation cover as quickly as possible is we've got a species here called Acacia or Vachellia. They've changed the name to Vachellia carew, which is a sweet thorn. It's part of the Acacia family. We use this, it's a pioneer species, and we use the brush, which is thorny, to protect these ponds or whichever recruitment plants that come up in these ponds from herbivory. But they also reduce the soil temperature by about 18%. And in South Africa, or particularly in the Baviaanskloof, where we regularly get 40-degree plus during summer, the soils become in excess of 50 degrees Celsius. You know, that's not a very happy growing environment for plants. So it really has had quite a significant effect on vegetation recruitment, plant protection from herbivory, because we can't exclude herbivory in this 32,000 hectare how can we call it, conservancy, which sits smack bang in the middle of a 280,000 hectare wilderness area. So wildlife is very impractical in this situation. So we thought this would be a good way to restrain herbivory on our restoration works. And then we had a 285% difference in our fractional green canopy cover where we used brush packing versus the areas that we didn't use brush packing. So ponds that were brush packed versus ponds that were not. And this is quite visible in the next picture. You can see there are 2 ponds dug exactly the same day on exactly the same slope, exactly the same soils. And this is after about a 3-month period where the one on the left was not brush packed and the one on the right was brush packed. And this wasn't seeded. And traditionally or regularly we seed these ponds as well with a mixture of indigenous species, just to start as pioneers in the system. So you can very, very clearly see what the difference is between brush packing and not brush packing. And I just thought this depicted it very clearly. So of course this increases your costs and that sort of things, but I think the trade-off and your benefit is just exponentially greater, adding that additional cost to the work. Yeah, I think so. Something like this ponding is a intermediary level kind of intervention. It's something that's simple, something that sits in between your upper slopes and your valley bottom, trying to capture as much water as possible, put it back into the system again. We're also doing some carbon tests to see how the soil is changing, and soil tests, general soil tests, including carbon, to see how the soils are changing in relation to soil chemistry, biology, and structure. In relation to these, yeah, it's been a very interesting process, seeing some sort of change despite the drought that we've been through. I think, excuse me, I'm just going to look back at these questions and see what are the questions, how I could approach the whole landscape approach thing in terms of people, plans, resources. And I think probably the end slide is probably the best one to go into this. I think because we're working in such a complex, multi-stratified system, you know, with so many knowledge areas, so much diversity, and so much complexity, I think the best way forward is just collaboration. You know, getting in touch and being in touch, being involved with people and organizations that have the necessary skills to share with you when you are tackling these type of projects. So these are just some of our partners. I think I've left a few out of this, but you know, some of these are purely just funders. Some of these are true partners in terms of developing landscape vision and strategy and long-term commitment. Other ones are educational institutions, you know, and we cycle students through the system or through the Baviaanskloof on a relatively regular basis, and a lot of these results that came out of in this presentation were done by students. So just that whole knowledge sharing in every aspect. And Charlotte, you mentioned the whole legal aspect of it. You know, in South Africa we have very stringent laws, environmental laws, and depending under which of these laws you're operating, you've got to deal with various departments, government departments, go through various processes, and the type of interventions that we use on the landscape can very often be influenced by that legislation. So something like ponding, there's a general acceptance of the methodology. Although we surpass, for instance, soil movement parameters, so I think you're only allowed to move X amount of soil per hectare in any given area. And I think we well exceed that doing something like ponding, but because it's so well recognized and institutionalized in government sector, it's been accepted. So it's something that's easy to do, whereas if we had to go more mechanical, more structural and engineering structures like gabions, we then require extensive assessments and environmental impact assessments, which make it exceptionally expensive and not really applicable. Yeah, and then just again, in terms of protection, I think depending on what your vision is for that landscape, if you want to end up utilizing it for something like livestock, well, then integrating livestock into your landscape design and your rehabilitation design right from the start, if that means a few years of rest, you know, that's something. But definitely incorporating the wildlife aspect into your restoration design and your long-term vision for that area. I think that's it for now. Any questions?
I will give the group one chance of a great question. Otherwise, we don't have enough time for Fernando. So we cannot proceed without you having asked this question. Who has that question? This is always hard because then it's a judgment call, right? Is my question important enough? But Otherwise, we can save it for the group discussion.
No, let's give
Yeah.
Fernando.
Okay. Great. Thanks so much, Otto, and really super inspiring. Even though it's not easy, but it's really inspirational. And thanks for sharing your insights on that. All right. I've muted myself while I was talking. Fernando, are you ready to go? Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe it's good to stop your video.
Try to share my screen.
Yeah. I've switched off your video just in case for the connection. Yeah. You have about 15 minutes and good luck.
Okay, well, more or less all the things, the general things had been explained by my mates previously. Then if to speed up my explanation, the question that Willemijn approach. Okay, what we have seen in our territory is regards the first point, how to best capture water in the landscape, is not to standardize techniques that can seem obvious. Is really important, because with the characteristic of our farmers, it's really difficult to get they convince, and once they see something that accepted as positive, many of them go through the implementation of these techniques, even when in their farm under their characteristics is not the best option or not the most appropriate. Okay, consider is following this not standardized, make a deep topography check of every farm, even if we consider that the typology of our farms. Okay, then we have to consider our farms under a part of the total landscape around it. Is something that it was really inspiring to hear the Baller, but what I felt myself was really selfish about the type of farms that we have in our territory. I will go deeper on this aspect later. Then consider the use of the land in the past and in the present, that for us is really important under the big and very quick change of use of the land that we are experimenting. And pay attention on the geological materials, because in Alvalar we have at least 3 big geological parts, and this is really important to implement and to decide what is the best technique that we have to go in for the water catchment, or to improve the water catchment. So what we have seen is we have to spread and develop a healthy and dense green coverture, especially in the woody groups, almond and olive orchards, which is the type of agriculture that we are nowadays the principal or the most relevant in our territory, is critical. To have our soils grabbed by the roots, and to avoid the erosion by runoff the water, the rainwater, is something is the best and the main technique we have to try to implement, and maybe the most difficult, because it's something cultural, and the people don't accept that to have the soil covered by grass, and learn a special management considering the evapotranspiration.
I'm sorry, Fernando, can you make your slide bigger?
And the benefits, the side benefits that I would try to do it. Yeah.
Presentation mode.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Now, okay. Well, this for the woody crops. Okay. In the case of grass crops, cereals, or also some techniques showing is something also really important, but very difficult to make the farmers to understand. Maybe because of the rentability in the management, the number of hours, or but these two aspects are being really difficult to make them easy, or to make them to interiorize. Another thing is really relevant for us is mainly nobody make a plan in advance or consider the planting frame. Okay, this is also a very problematic aspect, because when we go to the farms and want to advise or to try to implement some techniques, what we find is a kind of tree planting frame that avoid us make, for example, swales without cutting lines of trees. And when we approach, sometimes when we approach to cut some trees, is something that is really refused by the farmers. And for sure, pay attention to the geological materials that I mentioned previously, because sometimes some farmers have gone into the implementation of some techniques for water catchment, and this result in an overcost and very negative side effects. Okay, this is a type of a farm type in our territory. Okay, very slopey, very dry, with a heterogeneous planting frame, and with really remarkable marks of erosion in the slope, as you can see. This is a picture that involved 3 different farms. In some cases, we have the opportunity to go since the beginning in the design of the farm, and with farms with a bigger size over the average. Our average is around 100 hectares, and sometimes we have the opportunity to work with farmers with bigger farms like that, with a remarkable natural zone, which is really important also to stop to reduce the kinetic energy of the water flow when runoff, and start since the beginning imply also the design of the frame, the lines, and the possible swales and height correction in the gullies. Okay, the techniques that we tend to recommend, and after consulting the topography analysis, confirming our suspects in field visits, and confirming the hotspot of erosion and the soil management with a soil analysis visual for the texture, because many of them are soil that come from all cereal crops, and this is something really important because determine how the soil health will be to receive the almond plantation or the olive plantation, and also will determine the management that we can recommend to the different farmers. RV swales, check dams, very important and very nice to see the picture from Baler with this small check dams made of rock, not too high to the farmers with the land in the slopey part of our territory, and ponds. These three were the most adapted for our condition and also accepted by our farmers. Okay, to be accepted by our farmers is both positive and negative. Positive because they tend to go to the construction and to learn how to apply in their farms, but it's a bit negative because sometimes they make the things without consulting specialists or consulting us. And, you know, sometimes we have found that...
Fernando, just to make sure you have 5 minutes, I want to have some space for the Q&A. Is that okay?
Okay.
Sorry.
And also traditional, but with the ground and natural vegetation, and implement or improve the boundaries that since the 70s occupying almost 100% of the cultivated land. Then, first is the characteristic of really relevant in this case, especially with water management. We have to establish relationship with the competent authorities. In our case, is really relevant what we call hydrographic confederations. It's a kind of institution that is responsible of the management of every river basin. Okay, in our territory, we have affected by 3 of them, and it's really, really difficult work with them. That implies that, for example, we can't do any action in gullies like gabions without the permission, and for sure never is we can almost got this kind of permission from the Confederation. Okay, it's a very, very strange organization, and very difficult to establish a relationship with them. Obviously, we have to implement funds because it's very difficult for our farmers to invest money in non-productive between columns, non-productive part of the farm. It's really relevant because our characteristic, the property of our territory is very atomized, and this makes us to have a really difficult to manage the water catchment. For example, one gully can cross 3 different between the farmers less to approach any action. Then we have to have owners committed and join it in cases in case of small properties. The resources we need especially is a specific machinery, especially for swales, and a specialist to design and to develop the work. Okay, we have some bottleneck detected. In this case, is the lack of a specific machinery, the legal condition, and relationship with the institution that I have mentioned, and the social frame, the frame of planting and the kind of crops. How we can improve? Well, with the farmers, we have to continue with our courses. I think it's the best way to gather people involved and to join efforts. With the institution, we have to get, hopefully this year, we could establish the connection with this institution to present Albelal as a help that can avoid big inversion in controlled erosion, especially in the Ramblas. And with the bank of machinery that my workmates are developing, we expect to have enough resources to do it. We have detected some mistakes. For example, no previous check of the characteristic of the farm that some farmers have done. No holistic implementation of the techniques and water catchment. That means that they never consider the whole basin of the farm, and sometimes this make underestimation of the water they can catch. We have to consider the farm as a part of a big compound, especially in the slopey areas, especially in areas with salty water. When we grow the phreatic level, this salt will create a cap, a layer of salt that will avoid the growing of some species. Obviously, will permit the growing of another group of species, but not the vegetation that should be there. And sometimes not estimated by this is people tend to do ponds or to do big walls, and this can be really dangerous, especially with the regimen of rains that will reside in our territory, and especially with the scenario that the climate change is showing us, with rains of more than 200 liters per square meter in 1 hour, and then can be very risky in case of the wall breaks. And farmers tend to standardize both techniques can be applied in their farms, and if they don't like some kind of techniques, refuse because of they don't pay attention on the check of the characteristic of the farm. Then this is some picture from the management of the green coverture. For sure, this kind of management improves enormously the water infiltration and the soil as a sponge, but it's really difficult for the farmers in our territory to be adopted. A check of the farm's topography and where we can construct the swales in case of the soils, or action in the gullies, like in this case. Correct by terraces, slopey farms with irregular frames. This is a farm that has invested in creating terraces when this slope was totally connected and with serious erosion effects on it. Creation of ponds, but as I said at the beginning, making a geological and soil check, because if not, we can find permeable levels that make useless some ponds like that, because this big pond never will catch the water that it could. For example, this is the maximum level, and the cost of this pond was really big. Make a correction of the gully since they began constructing dams at the end of it, and it's more or less what I have to say from this aspect in Alvelar.
Muchas gracias, Fernando. And I realized while you were speaking that I forgot to introduce you. I'm sorry.
So much.
Thanks. So for those of you that have not met Fernando before, Fernando is actually, he's an ecologist working with Alvelar in the southeast of Spain. And in Alvelar, he's responsible for the natural zone restoration, but you've probably figured that out. And the fun fact about Fernando, he is crazy about birds. He knows a lot about birds. So if you have any questions about birds, you can also contact Fernando for that. So thank you for sharing, Fernando. I know that we're almost on time, so I just wanted to check if people need to.
Yeah, you know that we are in a rush. I forget that.
No problem, no problem. And I mean, the most important piece of today was to listen to your presentation. So this was all good. Does anybody have any questions? And I understand if people need to drop off, but for those of you that still have some questions, I would like to proceed with that. Or some takeaways or things that struck you, comparing the stories. Charlotte, do you have any thoughts that run through your mind now? Oh, Shekhar as well, yeah?
Firstly, I thoroughly enjoyed, I'm sure I can use some of these insights for my own work in India. The one big challenge I see in my work in India is simply the number of people and the small land ownership in India. I mean, for a patch of say 100 hectares, there are almost 500 families living on those patches. So getting these farmers together and to kickstart work would be one heck of a challenge. I was just wondering if any of you who started involving local landowners, how did you convince them, or what sort of meetings did you hold in order to put the thoughts across, and what sort of effort did it take? And the second part of the question is, was there any sort of traditional knowledge that came from bottom up, which was also put into the project? And how did you kind of blend modern knowledge and the traditional knowledge? If there's any insight into those, I would really appreciate it.
Who wants to give it a try?
Hi, if I can. This is Daniel. Right now we're working in Haiti on a project. It's our first section is about 6,000 acres. And we're working with Verushka here, Alessandra. I'm not sure who else might be in the group here. It's a big group. Sorry if I don't mention you. And so we're in the process of getting the buy-in from the farmers for that. And as in the past, we have to model the practices first, and we have to find early adopters who will put in these systems, because it has to be the local farmers who are successful first to prove it and have proof of concept basically through the local people. In 2012 and 13, we were doing this in Hench in Haiti. And we had 18 farmers for 2 weeks in a class and going through everything. And it was wonderful. There were a lot of benefits from that. Only one of the farmers actually did the practices across his entire farm. And at that point, we had to readjust what we called a success, because it wasn't until he did that that everybody else bought into it. And just 1 out of 18. That's like 1 out of 20, 1 out of 30. Anyway, until somebody does it within the community, within the village, and is successful, and just like, you know, like the Common Land 4 returns, they're getting all of their returns from that practice. All of a sudden, everybody's seeing that, and either it's from envy or from whatever it might be, everybody goes, oh, it works. And then of course, with that particular farmer, he was actually hired by the other farmers to help them redesign their farms in the same way. And in a number of years with his family of 10, they were known for doing this with the other farmers in the area, and had developed a small business doing consulting and building check dams and rotation and terraces and things like that in the ravines. So that's the big thing. And I have research papers that I've found that are all about that. How do you get buy-in from the local subsistence farmers in a huge project like this? Those are things that I could forward to you. I think they were off ResearchGate.
Yeah.
But it's true. And that's what I was noticing, and I commented to Waruska also during the first two presentations, is that our system is similar to you in India. We have occupied property, occupied land. And so we have to get their permission and their buy-in, but we have to prove it also. And especially now when their calories are going in all sorts of different directions. There's now, Friday they had 1 person with COVID-19. Monday they had 7 in Haiti. And now the island is closed. It's a state of emergency. So that's just another example of, we can't steal their calories for new concepts unless we absolutely are sure, and they are sure, that those calories will be increased based on all the effort that they put in. They're wisely skeptical of things that come their way.
Well,
if you want, guys, I can also collate all the articles and put them in one document related to this session, so I can. So if anybody wants to share resources, I'm happy to compile it, so you can email me.
Yeah, thank you.
Fernando?
Good to say, yeah. Can I answer at least the first part of the question from Sika? More or less in our territory is of small properties, very atomized, spread along the territory, and it's really difficult to impact to get the most useful periodical workshop and continuous.
The connection is not so strong, Fernando.
In the year, move to another room. Let me 5 minutes. You know, with the boys at home, with this confined situation, it's really difficult to occupy the best places.
But it's a bit better now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Perfect.
Then what we have found really useful was join the farmers in agro experiences, as I call them, and in agro coffees. In this kind of workshop, what we do is let the farmers that have implemented experience in a successful way explain the rest how it works, and explaining by our field technicians how we can help them to implement, to understand the technique, and adapt to the different farms. Because, you know, as I have tried to explain, we have different characteristic soils and geological materials, and it's a very good tool for us, and especially to get more people involved, because we do them open for the partners of Albolal, but sometimes also for people that is not part of Albolal, and it's also really good to get partners, because they see other farmers, not the words of technicians. They see examples of farmers that got benefits in their soils, in their crops, and explain how happy are they. Yes, more or less what I wanted to say.
If it's possible, I'm Frank, also from the Albolal project, and I'm working in the business development, and I'm manager of the first for return regenerative trading company for regenerative products, organic regenerative food, especially almonds. And I agree totally what Fernando said. It's very important to motivate the farmers by experiences, not only some intelligent speeches or something like that. No, they have to share between farmers what they do and what are the experiences. No, but on the other hand, it was also very important. This was one of the reasons we created this company, Almendres, as a trading company, to offer a market for their products, no, with a little bit higher price than the organic market prices, no. And this was for many farmers a first motivation, not the only one, no. Now it's necessary just to work to deepen a little bit in these agri experiences, that they can see really the effect, because the problem is that most things we do has more like a middle term or long term effect, no? And it's very difficult for many farmers to think a little bit in a long term space, I will say, no? And this is also important what they now do, that they understand this is an investment, no? And to improve, because when you change, for example, the soil, when you begin with ground cover, no, maybe in the first year or the second year also you can have some problems, because you are putting the ground cover on an ill soil, no. So they have to understand these are more or less middle or long term effects also, no. So it's a combination, no. But our farmers, I think, are more and more motivated, no, and also interesting for them to have an interesting market for the products, no. I don't know in India what's the situation regarding market, organic products, and so on, regenerative products, more or less. Now it's a boom for regenerative products in Europe, at least, no. So it's interesting. It helps, no.
Does that help, Shekhar, in terms of answering your question?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good starting. Yeah,
good.
Thanks.
And the good news is we can stay connected through this community, and I mean, I'm always open to topics and suggestions and happy to facilitate. So we can definitely continue this conversation. I'm also conscious of time and that people have other things to do. So I don't want to take too much of your time, unless people, of course, are very excited to keep going. But if you have to drop off, that's okay. So for the formal piece of the community of practice, I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank Charlotte for giving this idea for the session. I want to thank Otto. I want to thank Valer. I want to thank Jeremiah, Fernando, and everybody else that joined. New people and people that we already know. I hope you enjoyed it. I will send around, hopefully we can share the presentations. I will send around a recording. I'll send around some nice videos to watch and maybe put it in a one document, so you have a one-stop document connected to the session. So if you could all send your PowerPoint, some videos that you also find inspirational and would like to share, or articles that you find inspirational in this context, please do share, so we can have that distributed across this group. So I hope you all feel a bit inspired in these strange times. I hope we all come out safe and healthy and take good care of each other and ourselves. So thank you again. Charlotte, do you want to have some closing words maybe?
No.
Yes, you know, a lot of people want to talk about an idea and a new idea of a recipe for a cake. And I think more people than we think are worried about water problems. And we just have to bake the cake and then show the cake. And I'm thinking about, you know, the neighbor, because I had the experience here on the ranch, neighbors who were saying, what are you doing on the ranch? And so I was just peacefully talking about the recipe of the cake I was trying to do, but just very humble, you know, humbling. It's not like I have got the solution, which makes everybody nervous, but you know, there is a way there, a human, very simple way, I think, to be just doing our things. It's fantastic what I heard today and what we all try. And we are baking our cakes. And then when the cake is ready and the grass is growing and the trees are coming back and the birds and the insect and everything, the neighbors were waiting for that cake. And so they're going to try to do the same. And that neighbor, she said immediately, oh, I don't want to go the legal path and I don't want to go, that's too tiring. And I said, just don't worry. I mean, we are trying to find a simple way and I don't push anyone around me before the cake is baked. And but just, I think everybody here, I heard today that everybody's doing a fantastic job. And of course, conscience and inspiration is very, very important, but also just, I think, always trying to make the people understand that it's not climbing the big Himalayas mountain. It's just doing everyday, you know, things like we do and without any arrogant approach or you can't do it because you are too small. You know, it's very important to just have this inspiration going on and the consciousness working. And also, I think a lot of biologists and geologists are with incredibly complicated numbers and figures and percentages. And I think it's good to have the very simple vocabulary because a lot of people know, even if they didn't study that, they know there is a problem and they see that the cows are thin, there is no more grass, and they need really help, but they feel it. They just have the most simple words to explain what is a soil, what does the sponge means, what does that, and simplify, don't get them anxious. Just take them where they are with the language they speak, the way they know the thing, and they know a lot inside, I think. And so it would be great if people can feel they can do something. They are often very desperate and they are fixed with idea or big system, like in Spain with the European agriculture system who push you to plant always the same crops. And yeah, they are so scared not to be as everybody and to change and to find other solution. And they are so afraid of those big power like European Community Agriculture System. And I think that has to go away. We have to go back to the heart of the people, and they know, and help them there. Very, very simple. But thank you very much, everybody. I mean, this is so inspiring, and I'm enthusiastic. We're gonna get it. Bravo!
Yeah. Thanks so much, Charlotte. That's really helpful. And yeah, it's interesting. It's not rocket science. It's actually within reach. And I think if we continue to convey that message of hope. Willem, I would like to also give the floor to you. Just
actually, I first, Willemijn, I first wanted to thank you for hosting this and facilitating this workshop or whatever it's called, webinar. And it's fascinating and great to see all of you. I mean, with some people I haven't seen for ages or haven't been talking to for ages. So it's wonderful to see you. And Val, I mean, I've heard a lot of, about you from John D. Liu, and it was wonderful to hear your story from Jeremy also. So thank you very much for all of this. I just wanted to tap into what you said as the last final word. You know, Charlotte, it's so beautiful to see the similarities between, you know, the pandemic we have now with flattening, you know, everyone in the world is talking about flattening the curve and these kind of things. And basically what we do is flattening the curve as well, but then from a planetary health system perspective. And I think if we can tap into that consciousness that is now building up, we will get our momentum, or the momentum on this work, you know, what you're doing with Otto, with Bell, with all what we'll try to establish, Fernando and all those people here, is going to take off. So I'm pretty positive, and great to see you all. Thank you.
All right, let's close on that note of hope, and I wish you all a great evening,
Thank you,
morning, night, wherever you are, and stay in touch, stay connected.
Hasta luego.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.